How did a young man, barely out of his teens, conquer most of the known world in just over a decade, fundamentally reshaping history? You might know the name Alexander the Great, but the sheer audacity of his ambition, the complexity of his personality, and the meteoric speed of his rise and fall are truly astonishing. Today we're taking a deep dive into the incredible story of Alexander. We've gathered a really rich stack of sources for you, everything from ancient Greek and Roman accounts right through to modern historical analyses and some compelling documentaries. Our mission is to unpack his life, his legendary campaigns, and the lasting, often, paradoxical impact he had on the world. We'll explore his formidable education, his, let's say, fraught relationship with his equally powerful father, the strategic genius behind his legendary battles, and of course the internal struggles that came with ruling an unprecedented empire. Get ready for some genuine aha moments, because trust me, there's a lot more to Alexander than just conquest. Okay, let's unpack this first. To truly understand Alexander, we really have to understand the Macedonia he inherited.
For centuries, this northern kingdom was seen by many Greeks, especially, those in urbane cities like Athens and Corinth, as almost a barbarian or non-Greek state, kind of a rugged periphery. It was almost dismissed. But what's truly remarkable here is how Philip II, Alexander's father, transformed it. He took it from a poor, fractured region into a formidable power player.
Indeed. Philip was, he was a visionary king. He inherited a kingdom basically on the brink of collapse and, through sheer political genius and military innovation, turned it into the dominant force in the Greek world. He understood that wealth was foundational to power, right? So he meticulously developed Macedonia's gold and silver mines, turning it into an economic powerhouse. But his most revolutionary achievement was undoubtedly the reorganization of the Macedonian army. He introduced the sarissa, this massive pike between 15 and 18 feet long.
18 feet, that's incredible.
It is. And coupled with a counterweight on the end, it allowed for incredible reach and created this, impenetrable, bristling shield wall. Imagine a hedgehog made of spears moving in unison, utterly devastating to any traditional Greek hoplite phalanx they came up against. And beyond the sarissa, Philip developed highly specialized units. You had the elite cavalry, the companions, comprised of Macedonian nobles who acted as the king's personal strike force, capable of shattering enemy lines. He also integrated light infantry, engineers, siege specialists, all into a single cohesive fighting machine.
So not just an army, but like a professional military force.
Exactly. A professional, year-round military force, disciplined and loyal, capable of dominating any battlefield. It was something the Greek world had truly never seen before. And importantly, Philip wasn't just a military man, he promoted urban development too. He transformed the humble capital of Pella into this stately seat of government, a cultural center that rivaled even Athens, attracting artists and intellectuals.
So it's truly remarkable. Philip's genius didn't just transform Macedonia. He essentially forged the very weapon Alexander would later wield to conquer the known world. It's almost like he built the perfect launch pad for his son's ambition. But that weapon, that army, it needed a hand to guide it. And Alexander's unique upbringing certainly shaped his grip, didn't it?
Absolutely. Alexander grew up right in this crucible of transformation, heir to a throne secured by relentless warfare. He practiced close combat, weapon handling, daily. This wasn't just a hobby, you understand. It was fundamental preparation for rule.
Because a king had to fight.
Precisely. Philip, ever the warrior king, was mostly at war, constantly expanding his influence. So while Philip forged the military might, it was actually his mother, Olympias, who largely took care of Alexander's upbringing and instilled in him a very specific worldview. And what's truly fascinating here is the blend of that practical military training and the most elite intellectual development available. Philip knew that a king needed more than just a sword. He needed a mind. So he famously brought in Aristotle.
The Aristotle.
Arguably the greatest mind in Greece, to tutor Alexander from age 13. Aristotle taught him not just facts, but how to think critically across a vast array of subjects: ethics, politics, medicine, philosophy, even astronomy. And Alexander, he wasn't a passive student. He devoured Homeric epics. He made the Iliad his closest companion, carrying a leather-bound copy with him throughout his campaigns. Aristotle's influence, according to Plutarch anyway, taught Alexander how to live well. It instilled in him a sense of purpose and this idea that a nation, like a body, needed a strong heart, clear eyes, steady hands, and crucially, a soul to justify its deeds. This would later shape Alexander's vision of, a unified empire.
But his education wasn't just about earthly skills, was it? We hear constantly about divine descent playing this huge, almost obsessive role in his self-perception and, how others saw him. How much of this was genuine belief, do you think, and how much was strategic propaganda?
That's a crucial question, and it really gets to the core of Alexander's complex personality. Look, ancient royal families, especially in the East, frequently used fictional or mythical pedigrees to justify their claims to power. That was standard practice.
Right.
Alexander's parents, however, seem to have had a genuine belief in their own divine connections. His mother, Olympias, was particularly fervent. She was this powerful, enigmatic woman, deeply involved in religious rituals, often involving snakes, apparently. And she constantly told Alexander he wasn't of this world, that he was destined for greatness beyond human comprehension. This undoubtedly influenced his own conviction in his superhuman abilities and, yeah, a direct connection to the divine. We see this reflected in art, too. There's the mosaic from Pella showing Alexander with a lion looking strikingly like Heracles, a son of Zeus, symbolizing his royal and godlike status.
That's a mix.
It's a potent mix, I think. Personal conviction, fueled by his mother's almost mystical influence, combined with a masterful understanding of how to use propaganda to legitimize his rule and inspire his followers. It's hard to say where one ended and the other began, truly. The story of Bucephalus, the untamable horse, it's a great anecdote that perfectly captures Alexander's decisive boldness and his, uncanny ability to see what others miss.
Ah, yes, the horse story. Tell us.
So imagine this. A magnificent, powerful stallion, wild and rideable, brought before Philip in his court. Everyone is stumped. But young Alexander, just 12 years old, observes something crucial. The horse is afraid of its own shadow. Instead of trying to force it with brute strength, he turns it towards the sun, eliminating the shadow, and in doing so, calms and tames this magnificent creature. Philip, witnessing this display of insight and courage, is said to have declared, "My boy, seek a kingdom worthy of yourself, for Macedonia is too small for you."
Wow, even at 12.
Even at 12, this early display of perception, courage, and a deep understanding of psychology, even equine psychology, really foreshadowed the extraordinary leader he would become. A man who saw problems differently and acted with, unwavering conviction.
Okay, so Philip's army is now this finely tuned machine. They march south, bringing one Greek city after another under Macedonian influence. The big showdown, the moment Philip cemented his dominance, came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC. This was Alexander's first major battle, wasn't it? His brutal debut on the grand stage.
Yes, and a truly decisive one for the future of Greece, and crucially, Alexander's place within it. Alexander, then a fiery 18-year-old, wasn't just a spectator. He commanded the companion cavalry, the elite horsemen who were Philip's most trusted weapon. Now, the combined forces of Athens and Thebes, traditional rivals but now united against the Macedonian threat, they fought bravely. You have to give them that. They demonstrated the courage of free men defending their homeland. However, they simply couldn't match the discipline, the innovative tactics, and the coordinated maneuvers of Philip's professional fighting force.
And the numbers, were they evenly matched?
Roughly, yes. Both armies fielded around 34,000 soldiers each. But Philip's strategic genius and Alexander's, audacious execution proved superior. At a crucial moment in the battle, Philip feigned a retreat, drawing the Athenian line forward and creating a gap in the enemy formation.
A classic tactic.
A classic tactic, executed perfectly. Alexander seized this fleeting opportunity. He led a furious, perfectly timed charge of the companion cavalry, smashing right through that gap that opened between the Theban and Athenian lines. This charge was absolutely decisive. It utterly broke the formidable Theban sacred band.
The elite Theban unit.
That's the one. An elite troop of 300 homosexual lovers who fought as pairs, renowned for their unwavering courage. They were annihilated. Meanwhile, the Athenian foot soldiers, lured forward, ran headlong into that impenetrable wall of deadly Sarissa spears.
It sounds like a perfectly executed pincer movement almost. So Alexander, commanding that pivotal cavalry charge, he was undeniably the hero of Chaeronea. It solidified Macedonia's superpower status and, I imagine, greatly strengthened Alexander's standing, made him credible as a future king.
Absolutely. His role was paramount. His decisive charge made victory possible, greatly strengthening his standing with the Macedonians. Philip, overcome with pride, embraced his son, reportedly tearing up and exclaiming, "Today you have proven yourself worthy of the name you bear."
A powerful moment between father and son.
A powerful moment, and this victory made Philip master of Greece. He then summoned all city delegates to Corinth, forming the League of Corinth. Now, this was an alliance that, while ostensibly for peace, effectively forbade Greeks from fighting each other, ensuring Macedonian hegemony really
Under Philip's control.
under Philip's control. And then Philip suggested the grand idea, a joint campaign, attacking Persia together. A plan that would ultimately, ironically, be Alexander's to fulfill.
But just 2 short years after Chaeronea, right at the absolute peak of his power, Philip was assassinated. The sources, as you know, present conflicting ideas about who might have been involved in this dramatic, pivotal event. It's a real historical whodunit.
Indeed, and the mystery has fueled debate for centuries. The assassin was Pausanias, a captain of Philip's own bodyguard who struck the fatal blow during the wedding celebration of Philip's daughter. Now, some ancient sources describe Pausanias as a jilted lover seeking revenge for some personal slight that Philip had failed to address.
A personal motive.
Possibly. However, suspicions immediately arose, and they were wide-ranging. Some pointed to political rivals who feared Macedonia's growing, unchecked power. Others, perhaps more compellingly, implicated Olympias herself.
Alexander's mother again.
Alexander's fiery and ambitious mother, yes. The theory goes she feared her son might be displaced in the succession by Philip's new, much younger Macedonian wife, Cleopatra Eurydice, who had just given birth to a son, a pure-blooded Macedonian heir, which Alexander wasn't, technically, through Olympias.
That adds a layer.
It does. Aristotle, who was a contemporary source, he leans towards Pausanias acting alone out of personal grievance, but other accounts openly question this, leaving the truth shrouded in ambiguity and intrigue to this day. And the fact that Pausanias was killed almost immediately after the act, well, that only deepened the suspicion.
So this sudden, violent death left Alexander, at just 20 years old, with a kingdom in turmoil and immense pressure. He had to prove his legitimacy and control very, very quickly. And he faced immediate, fierce challenges, didn't he? Territories Philip had subjugated saw an opportunity, right? Throw off the Macedonian yoke? Within days of Philip's death, Alexander faced revolts erupting across Greece and the Balkans. How did he deal with this burgeoning chaos, particularly the powerful city of Thebes?
He acted with, well, astonishing swiftness and uncompromising decisiveness, immediately showing himself to be, as one source describes, a cold power politician. Thebes, a proud and historically independent city-state, was particularly quick to act.
They saw their chance.
They thought they did. Encouraged by premature rumors of Alexander's death while campaigning up in Illyria, they revolted, expelled the Macedonian garrison, declared independence. Alexander responded with incredible speed. He marched south with a rapidity that stunned everyone. He appeared before Thebes, before its leaders had even finished celebrating their supposed freedom. He initially offered mercy, hoping to avoid destroying one of Greece's most ancient and revered cities and, avoid spilling more Greek blood. But the Thebans, proud perhaps to the point of blindness, chose to fight.
A fatal miscalculation.
A fatal one. The siege of Thebes lasted only a few brutal days. When the walls were breached, Alexander's control over his soldiers apparently slipped. His troops, fueled by their losses during the siege and inflamed by memories of past Theban resistance to Macedonian rule, showed absolutely no mercy. The resulting slaughter was horrific.
How bad was it?
Over 6,000 Thebans died in the streets. Another 30,000 were sold into slavery. The city itself was razed to the ground, just wiped off the map. A chilling act of total destruction.
Total destruction.
Almost. He spared the temples and notably the house of the revered poet Pindar. But that exception just highlighted the rule. This was a clear signal to all other cities that dared to oppose Macedonian supremacy. Athens, interestingly, despite its obvious role in inciting the revolt, was miraculously spared.
How did Athens escape?
Shrewd diplomacy, basically.
Yeah.
A politician named Demades went to Alexander and somehow persuaded him to forgive and forget, narrowly avoiding a similar fate for Athens.
So this wasn't just a brutal act of revenge, it was a calculated political statement, designed to instill terror and obedience across Greece. It showed Alexander's willingness to sacrifice traditional Greek unity for absolute Macedonian control, fundamentally changing the political landscape. He sent a chilling message. Resistance would be met with total annihilation, a lesson Athens very nearly learned.
Precisely. As the historian Peter Green powerfully put it, after the initial terror subsided, the Greeks' attitude towards Alexander hardened into a bitter and implacable hatred, even if they outwardly collaborated with cynical obsequiousness. He had hammered the final nail into the coffin of any genuine, willing relationship with other Greek city-states. He transformed himself from a leader into an undisputed, feared overlord.
Okay, so with Greece now cowed into submission, Alexander finally turned his gaze eastward. He prepared for that grand campaign Philip had envisioned, attacking the vast Persian Empire. This was a truly massive undertaking, designed not just for conquest, but, as Alexander framed it anyway, to liberate Greek cities in Asia Minor from Persian rule and, crucially, to avenge past Persian invasions, specifically Xerxes' invasion of Greece a century and a half earlier.
This Hellenic army Alexander led was indeed formidable, a potent integration of Macedonian might and Greek tactical prowess. Its backbone, as we've said, was the sarissa-armed phalanx, that bristling forest of spears capable of stopping even massed cavalry charges. Now, exact numbers are always debated among ancient sources, but Alexander probably began with approximately 50,000 troops. This included around 35,000 infantry, among them 9,000 phalangites, and a powerful strike force of maybe 5,500 cavalry, along with a moderate fleet. Formidable, yes, but still heavily outnumbered by the vast and diverse Persian forces, who could theoretically call upon millions across their sprawling empire. And Alexander made crucial strategic and financial preparations. He shrewdly borrowed an enormous sum of money to fund the expedition, confident, utterly confident, that it would be repaid by the immense Persian treasure he intended to seize. In a bold display of commitment, he reportedly gave away most of his Macedonian crown lands to his friends and officers.
Really? Gave away his lands?
Essentially saying he would gain new, richer lands in Asia. He also made a crucial strategic decision, leaving his most experienced general, Antipater, back in Macedonia, with a substantial force, maybe 12,000 infantry and 1,500 cavalry. This secured his rear against any further revolts in Greece, while he embarked on what would become the greatest military campaign in ancient history.
And then the crossing. Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Anatolia in 334 BC, just 2 years after ascending the throne. This wasn't just a military maneuver, was it? There was a huge amount of symbolism involved in that initial crossing, almost like a performance for his troops and for history itself.
Absolutely. Alexander was a master of grand gestures, and this crossing was steeped in symbolic power. As his prow ground into the shallows, he didn't wait for a ramp. He personally leaped overboard, fully armed, hurled his spear into the sand of Asia Minor, and shouted, "I accept Asia from the gods, won by my spear."
Wow. Talk about making an entrance.
Exactly. This consciously echoed Protesilaus, the first Greek soldier ashore during the legendary Trojan War, immediately linking his campaign to mythical heroism and, some say, fulfilling an ancient prophecy. But he didn't stop there. He then famously visited Troy itself, a place of profound significance for any Greek. He took a sacred shield from Athena's temple and performed a ritual for Achilles and Patroclus with his closest companion, Hephaestion, explicitly establishing himself as a new Achilles, destined for epic glory.
The new Achilles.
These acts transformed what might have been seen as a mere invasion into a holy war, a divinely sanctioned mission to avenge ancient wrongs and liberate Greece from Persian rule. This profoundly resonated with and inspired his troops, making them believe they were part of something much, much greater than mere conquest.
So why did these symbolic acts matter so much to Alexander and his men? It seems almost theatrical, but there's a deeper purpose, isn't there?
Oh, it's all about narrative and motivation. For Alexander, it was about legitimizing his campaign, setting himself up as the destined leader. For his men, these acts transformed their grueling, dangerous mission into a glorious, heroic undertaking. It tapped into their deepest cultural myths and aspirations.
Making it more than just war.
Exactly. Think of the psychological impact. They weren't just fighting for a king, they were fighting alongside a king who saw himself as a direct descendant of heroes like Heracles and Achilles, leading a new Trojan War. Only this time, the Greeks were destined to win definitively. It imbued the entire expedition with this sense of divine favor and historical inevitability.
Alexander's first major confrontation with the Persian forces came almost immediately at the Granicus River. The Persian satraps, the local governors, decided to fight a pitched battle there, famously against the shrewd advice of a Greek general in Persian service, Memnon of Rhodes. That decision proved costly for them.
Memnon was a truly skilled Greek general, a mercenary in Persian service who understood Alexander's tactics intimately. He advised a scorched earth policy. Burn crops, burn villages, starve Alexander out, deny him supplies. He even suggested opening a second front back in Greece to draw Alexander away.
That sounds like a smart strategy.
It would have been devastatingly effective. But the Persian satraps, well, they were arrogant, unwilling to lay waste to their own lands. They dismissed his advice. They believed their numerical superiority and their strong defensive position atop the steep riverbank with over 10,000 Persian cavalry, roughly twice Alexander's total cavalry, would make their position impregnable. Despite Alexander's own general, Parmenion, advising caution, advising him to wait until dawn, Alexander, ever the audacious risk-taker, ordered an immediate assault. He led his right wing across the river himself, clad in magnificent armor, making him an easy and tempting target for the enemy. Several elite Persian contingents immediately shifted to oppose him.
He led from the front.
Always. The battle was fierce from the very beginning, a chaotic melee in the riverbed. Alexander himself was fighting for his life at one point, charged by two formidable Persian nobles, Rosaces and Spithridates. It was Clitus the Black, his loyal officer.
The same Clitus.
The very same Clitus he would later. We'll get to that. Clitus saved Alexander's life at the last possible moment, severing Spithridates' arm just as the Persian sword was about to fall on Alexander's head. Once the Macedonian phalanx got across the river and engaged, their superior discipline and the devastating reach of the sarissas proved overwhelmingly superior, cutting down many Persian commanders. Alexander then turned his fury on the 2,000 Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia.
Greeks fighting Greeks. That must have enraged him.
It did. A deep betrayal in his eyes. He ordered a massacre, slaughtering thousands of them and sending the remaining 2,000, including some Athenians apparently, to labor in Macedonian mines, a brutal and unprecedented punishment for fellow Greeks. Some sources, like Plutarch, saw this act as influenced more by anger than by reason, a moment where Alexander's personal rage perhaps overshadowed strategic calculation.
That move, the slaughter of the Greek mercenaries, certainly cost Alexander more troops than any other point in that battle, maybe unnecessarily. But what did it ultimately gain him beyond revenge?
Well, it sent a very clear, very brutal message. There would be absolutely no mercy for Greeks fighting on the side of Persia. This was more than just a tactical victory. It was a psychological blow against any potential Greek collaborators. And strategically, Alexander's victory at Granicus completely opened up all of Asia Minor to his advance, securing his first major foothold in the Persian Empire and establishing his reputation as an unstoppable force. The Persian army in Asia Minor was effectively neutralized.
Alexander then marched through Asia Minor, taking cities, and eventually arrived at Gordium, a city famous for its supposedly unsolvable knot. This is one of those legendary moments that really defines his approach, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Legend stated that whoever could untie this fantastically complicated knot, tied by King Gordius himself, would be destined to reign over the entire Persian Empire. Alexander, never one to pass up a propaganda opportunity or a chance to demonstrate his unique approach, famously confronted the knot. Instead of painstakingly trying to untie it, getting bogged down in the complexity, he simply drew his sword and cut it with a single decisive blow.
Cut the Gordian knot. It certainly solidified his image. But isn't there an argument to be made that cutting the knot rather than untying it was perhaps a rejection of intellectual patience, favoring brute force over subtle understanding? Or was it just brilliant pragmatism, a shortcut that perfectly encapsulated his style?
That's a great question, and it really highlights the multiple ways Alexander can be interpreted, can't it? On one hand, yeah, you could argue it showed a disregard for tradition, a preference for brute force over careful, methodical work. But on the other, and perhaps more accurately, it conveyed that he did things his own way. He succeeded where others had failed, not by adherence to rules, but by sheer will and direct action.
Getting the job done.
Getting the job done his way. It was a brilliant, clever move that perfectly reinforced his self-proclaimed destiny as the one true ruler, someone who could literally cut through problems others found insurmountable, a powerful, unforgettable symbol of his unique genius and his destiny.
Okay, so Darius III, the great king of Persia, had largely stayed away from those early confrontations in Asia Minor. But after the loss there, he finally decided to confront Alexander personally. This clash at Issus in 303 BC was a crucial turning point, a true clash of titans.
Darius, as the great king, was really forced to act to preserve his empire at this point. He mustered a truly massive army. Now, ancient accounts wildly exaggerate its size, claiming numbers as high as 600,000 men, which is just unbelievable. Modern historians estimate it was closer to maybe 100,000, perhaps 150,000. Still a formidable force.
Still huge compared to Alexander's army.
Absolutely. He drew soldiers from every corner of his vast multi-ethnic empire. You had formidable units like the Scythian horsemen, renowned for their incredible archery skills. You had the terrifying sight of Indian war elephants, living siege engines that could break infantry lines. And then, of course, the immortals, the Persian king's elite 10,000-strong royal guard. Darius was bringing the full, awe-inspiring might of his empire, and Darius aimed to trap Alexander. He moved his army behind Alexander's, blocking his escape route on this narrow coastal plain less than 2 miles wide between the mountains and the sea. This terrain, however, ironically favored the smaller, more disciplined Macedonian force over the unwieldy Persian host. It effectively negated Darius's greatest advantage, numbers. It was a strategic blunder, really, as his vast army couldn't deploy effectively.
Interesting. So his attempt to trap Alexander actually helped Alexander.
In a way, yes. And before the battle, Darius, increasingly aware that Alexander's relentless advance threatened the very foundations of his empire, sent an emissary. He offered a remarkably generous peace deal.
What was the offer?
Alexander could have half his empire, specifically all of Asia Minor west of the Halys River, and Darius's daughter in marriage, in exchange for peace and an end to hostilities. Now, Parmenion, Alexander's most experienced general, a pragmatic veteran, strongly advised accepting it. He saw it as achieving all the campaign's original objectives and more.
Sounds like a good deal.
It sounds like a fantastic deal. But Alexander famously retorted, with this blend of arrogance and absolute conviction, "So would I if I were Parmenion." He saw his destiny as ruling the entire world, not just half an empire. His arrogant rebuttal to Darius was clear. Everything you possess is now mine.
Incredible confidence.
Yes.
Or arrogance.
Both, probably. This incident powerfully highlights Alexander's boundless ambition, which often surpassed the more pragmatic views of even his most trusted generals. In the battle itself, the Macedonian phalanx held the center, forming that impenetrable wall of death with their sarissas. Alexander himself led the companion cavalry on the right wing, poised to strike the decisive blow. Darius, resplendent in his ivory and gold chariot, a beacon for his troops, was surrounded by his immortals. Alexander spotted an opportunity when Darius committed reserves to his left flank, inadvertently thinning his center. Alexander then led a wedge formation directly at Darius's chariot, cutting a path through the elite Persian guard, leading to fierce personal fighting right around the great king.
He went straight for Darius.
Straight for the king! Darius, seeing his section of the battle lost and fearing capture or death, once again lost courage and fled, abandoning his family, his treasure, everything, for a second time if you count the satraps at Chronicles representing him. This was a shattering blow, psychologically and militarily, from which Persia would never truly recover.
After Issus, Alexander moved south to secure the Phoenician naval bases along the eastern Mediterranean coast. These were crucial, weren't they, for eliminating Persian naval power, which still posed a threat. Tyre, that famously impregnable island city, posed a significant, almost impossible challenge.
Tyre, a celebrated Phoenician city, was indeed a marvel of ancient engineering. Built on a rocky island half a mile offshore, it was considered impregnable. Massive walls, a formidable fleet. The Tyrians initially mocked Alexander, believing no army could breach their defenses across the water.
They felt safe on their island.
Completely. Alexander, however, embarked on an unprecedented and audacious engineering feat, building a mole, a causeway 200 feet wide from the mainland right out to the island, effectively turning it into a peninsula. This involved felling vast amounts of timber from cedar trees and drafting tens of thousands of laborers from nearby towns and captured peoples. And Alexander was constantly present, right at the forefront, motivating workers, supervising construction, even handing out rewards. Hands-on leadership. The Tyrians, however, were not passive. They fiercely harassed the construction with skiffs carrying archers and missile troops. They even launched a devastating fire ship, a massive merchant vessel loaded with incendiary materials, sailed it right into the mall and set it ablaze. It severely damaged the causeway and burned down Alexander's early siege towers.
A major setback.
A major setback, but Alexander countered. He built screens to protect his workers, new, taller siege towers. After 7 grueling months of relentless effort and brutal skirmishes, the causeway was finally complete. Alexander then deployed his full array of siege weaponry, catapults, ballistas, and he introduced a new, innovative weapon, ships armed with battering rams to assault the city's defenses directly from the sea.
Attacking from land and sea.
Exactly. The city eventually fell after a brutal, all-out assault. The result was horrifying for its inhabitants. 8,000 Tyrians died in the fighting, and another 30,000 were sold into slavery.
That's incredibly ruthless. It's a clear example of his determination, his willingness to pay any cost to achieve his objectives.
Yes, it sent a brutal, unmistakable message. No fortress was strong enough to stop the Macedonian advance, and that no obstacle was too great for Alexander to overcome. He then moved on to Gaza, another strategically vital city that also offered stiff resistance for 2 months. Here, he applied similar siege tactics, having a massive mound constructed to the same height as Gaza's walls to bring his siege engines to bear. During the operations, he was personally wounded in the shoulder by a missile, an injury that, according to some sources, proved a soothsayer's prediction that he would be hit if he continued his sacrifice ritual.
He ignored the omen.
Seems like it. The city eventually fell after 2 months. Its commander, Battis, was reportedly dragged behind a chariot by Alexander himself, mirroring Achilles' treatment of Hector in the Iliad. Though it's worth noting this gruesome detail is often debated by historians. Some suggest it's a later fabrication, maybe added to link Alexander more directly to his Homeric hero Achilles, or perhaps even to portray him in a more tyrannical light, depending on the source's agenda.
All right, the sources always have an angle. So after these grueling sieges, Alexander entered Egypt, then a Persian province. How was he received there? It seems like a dramatic change from the brutal conquests he'd just undertaken.
It was a stark contrast, really. The Egyptians, weary of 200 years of often oppressive Persian rule, welcomed Alexander enthusiastically as a liberator. He was crowned Pharaoh in Memphis, a title that effectively deified him in the eyes of the Egyptian priests, placing him in a lineage of ancient Egyptian kings. This reinforced his already quasi-mythical aura and provided him with powerful local legitimacy. That was crucial for governing such a vast, diverse empire.
And then he ventured deep into the desert to the Siwa oasis. This seems less like a military move, more personal, almost spiritual, given the danger and isolation of the journey. What was that about?
What's truly fascinating here is his arduous and dangerous journey across the desert to the remote oracle of Amun, a deity whom the Greeks identified with their chief god, Zeus. What exactly transpired there remains one of history's great mysteries, a point of much speculation and debate among ancient historians.
We don't know what the oracle said.
Not for sure. Later accounts, though perhaps embellished, claim the oracle addressed him directly as son of Amun Zeus and prophesied his unmatched success and invincibility. Alexander emerged from that encounter seemingly transformed, though he famously never revealed the exact words exchanged. He became increasingly receptive to suggestions of his own divinity, an idea that profoundly shaped his self-conception and his later rule.
A turning point for him personally.
The profound psychological and spiritual turning point, yes. It aligned him with Egyptian and Persian ideas of divinely sanctioned kingship. And while in Egypt, Alexander also demonstrated remarkable administrative acumen. What's often overlooked in his whirlwind of conquest is that he wasn't just marching through, he was setting up systems designed for long-term stability to prevent future rebellions.
How so?
Well, he shrewdly separated the civil and military branches of government. This meant routine bureaucracy and local governance remained largely in the hands of local Egyptians. That gained him their immediate favor and significantly reduced the friction of foreign rule. Meanwhile, military control was strategically divided among multiple Greek commanders, ensuring no single governor could amass too much power and potentially rebel.
Clever. Respect local ways, but keep the military power.
Exactly. This innovative approach became a crucial template for governance throughout his expanding empire, a blueprint for future Hellenistic kingdoms. And of course, he founded Alexandria, a city destined to be a major cultural and commercial crossroads, brilliantly envisioned to link East and West and become a hub of learning and trade.
Okay, so Darius III, having regrouped yet again and gathered another massive army, prepared for a final decisive confrontation in Assyria at Gaugamela. This was truly the battle that would decide the fate of the Persian Empire, wasn't it?
It was the big one. Darius had learned from his mistakes at Isis. He meticulously chose an open terrain, a vast plain ideal for maneuvering his chariots and exploiting his numerical superiority. He even had the ground leveled in anticipation of battle to eliminate any obstacles for his scythed chariots.
Preparing the battlefield.
Very carefully. He stacked a large amount of cavalry on his left flank, directly opposite where he expected Alexander and his elite companions would likely attack. While ancient sources wildly exaggerate Persian numbers again, claiming over 1 million men, modern historians estimate Darius's army was still enormous, perhaps around 100,000, maybe even up to 250,000 strong. Darius also had 15 war elephants, though wisely he chose not to deploy them in the battle itself, probably due to their unpredictable nature, using them instead as a psychological deterrent beforehand. Alexander's strategy at Gaugamela was nothing short of brilliant. A masterpiece of tactical deception and audacious execution. He deliberately feigned a move far to his right, drawing Darius's left flank to overextend and pursue him. This inadvertently created a crucial gap in the Persian battle line right in the center.
He drew them out of position.
Exactly. Alexander then seized this moment. He wheeled his companion cavalry in a lightning-fast maneuver and charged directly through this newly created gap, aiming straight for Darius himself, who was surrounded by his personal guard. Darius, just like at Aetius, once again lost courage and fled, abandoning the battlefield for a second time.
Darius fled again.
He did, and this wasn't just a military retreat. It was a psychological collapse that shattered the prestige of the great king and his empire, a blow from which Persia would never recover.
What's truly fascinating here, too, is the story of Alexander's apparent calm, his ability to sleep soundly on the eve of such a monumental, empire-deciding battle. It speaks volumes about his confidence, doesn't it?
It really does. Parmenion, his trusted general, reportedly found Alexander asleep just before dawn and asked how he could rest so soundly with such a momentous battle ahead. Alexander simply replied that he had indeed been worried when the Persians were retreating and avoiding battle, but now that pitched battle was on the cards, by Heracles, he has done exactly what I wanted.
Incredible self-assurance.
Utterly. Gaugamela was truly Alexander's tactical masterpiece. A brilliant victory against a numerically superior foe on a battlefield chosen and prepared specifically by the enemy. It was a strategic triumph that military geniuses throughout history, like Napoleon at Austerlitz, would later study and emulate. Macedonian losses were minimal, reported as only a few hundred men, while Persian losses were in the tens of thousands.
So this was it. Not just a military victory. It psychologically shattered the prestige of Darius and effectively ended the organized Persian resistance, paving the way for Alexander's dominion over the largest empire the world had ever seen. The road to Babylon and Persepolis lay wide open. After Gaugamela, the road to Babylon and Persepolis, the ceremonial and religious heart of Persia, did indeed lie open to Alexander. He entered Babylon in triumph and then moved on to Persepolis, where he seized the enormous Persian treasury. The Persian Empire was effectively conquered.
Babylon, described by ancient writers as one of the most impressive cities in the world, with its legendary walls and hanging gardens, became Alexander's second seat of government. He was apparently so impressed by its size, splendor, and luxury that he wanted to reside there himself and make it even more glamorous, envisioning it as the capital of his new empire. Darius, however, had fled further east, hoping somehow to raise another army. But a conspiracy formed against him, led primarily by Bessus, the satrap of Bactria. Bessus eventually seized and chained Darius. When Alexander finally found Darius, he was dead, murdered by Bessus. Alexander was reportedly furious.
Furious why?
Darius was his enemy.
Because he hadn't wanted Darius killed by a treacherous subordinate. He wanted to capture and defeat Darius himself, to claim the empire by his own hand and legitimize his succession. Killing him this way denied Alexander that ultimate victory. So he gave Darius a royal funeral, a gesture that further cemented his claim to be the legitimate successor, not just a conqueror. What does this mean for the campaign's original goals? Hadn't the apparent goal destroying the Persian Empire been achieved with Darius's death and the capture of its capitals? Why keep going east?
Well, on the surface, yes, the apparent goal of destroying the Achaemenid Persian Empire had been achieved. But if there is one aspect of Alexander that all historians agree upon, it is that he was relentlessly, insatiably ambitious. Aristotle had taught him geography, and Alexander was aware of lands further east. He knew about India, and he knew about the great ocean that supposedly lay that way, believing it to be only a few days' march beyond the Indus River.
He wanted to reach the edge of the world.
Essentially, yes. He immediately began planning the next phase. He wanted to conquer the known world, to reach the very edges of the earth, pushing far beyond the traditional confines of the Persian Empire. His vision was no longer just about defeating Persia. It was about universal dominion.
And so, Alexander continued relentlessly eastward into what is now Afghanistan and Central Asia, facing new kinds of challenges, quite different from the pitched battles against vast armies he'd fought before. This was guerrilla warfare in hostile, unfamiliar terrain.
Exactly. This campaign, stretching across Bactria and Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia, involved incredibly difficult terrain. Mountainous, desert regions, steep passes, raging rivers, formidable mountain fortresses like the Sogdian Rock. The local inhabitants, skilled in guerrilla warfare, were fiercely independent and launched constant raids against his troops. It forced Alexander to employ all his logistical and tactical expertise, often personally leading daring assaults.
Still leading from the front.
Always. To secure these remote lands and establish his authority, Alexander built numerous new cities, often named Alexandria, which served as garrisons, administrative centers, and crucial cultural bastions, spreading Hellenic influence far and wide. But the army, thousands of miles from home, grew increasingly unhappy. Most hadn't seen their homes in years, and their kings seemed bent on conquest without end, dragging them into ever more remote and dangerous lands. This period also saw growing internal tensions between Alexander and his Macedonian veterans.
How so? What were the tensions about?
He began to adopt Persian rituals and dress, things like the practice of proskynesis, which involved bowing or prostrating oneself. This was seen by many of his old guard, his Macedonian companions, as effeminate, decadent, and frankly, a betrayal of their Macedonian heritage. The Clitus incident in 328 BC perfectly illustrates this dark side and his growing arrogance, perhaps exacerbated by alcohol and the immense pressures of command. At Maracanda, modern Samarkand, Alexander killed Clitus the Black in a furious, drunken argument during a banquet.
Killed Clitus, the man who saved his life at Granicus.
The very same man. Alexander was later full of profound remorse, apparently isolating himself in his tent for days, weeping inconsolably. But this event, where Alexander broke the sacred rules of Greek hospitality, xenia, and murdered a loyal friend in a drunken rage, revealed his increasing volatility, his potentially dangerous temper, and it alienated many of his old comrades, sowing seeds of real resentment. Then the proskynesis controversy further exposed the deep philosophical gulf opening within the Macedonian court. Alexander's attempt to make his countrymen perform proskynesis, prostrating themselves before the king, a Persian custom of reverence, crossed a sacred line for Greeks. To them, this was blasphemy, a gesture reserved only for gods.
They wouldn't bow to a man?
Precisely. Callisthenes, Alexander's official historian, and, interestingly, Aristotle's nephew, famously refused. He declared that no free Greek would ever bow before any mortal man. This principled refusal led to Callisthenes' downfall and eventual death in captivity under allegations of conspiracy. It highlighted Alexander's increasing intolerance for dissent and his growing adoption of despotic Eastern-style rule.
So these incidents really show Alexander's increasing isolation, don't they, as he pursued this vision of a fused empire that many of his Macedonian companions simply could not share. He was becoming less a king of Macedon and more an emperor of Asia, it seems.
Exactly. And Alexander's marriage to Roxanne, the daughter of a Bactrian noble in 327 BC, further exacerbated these tensions. While it was undoubtedly a significant political alliance, some sources also suggest it was a genuine romantic choice, perhaps his only true love.
A love match.
Possibly. But this union profoundly unsettled many veterans. It signaled Alexander's increasing Eastern mindset and his willingness to integrate non-Greeks into his family and inner circle. He also controversially began introducing Persian soldiers into Macedonian units and appointing Persians to elite positions within his administration and army. This further alienated his traditional Macedonian forces, who viewed their privileged status as a birthright, something gained through blood and conquest. His dream of homonoia, or unity of minds, was clashing violently with the realities of cultural prejudice and entitlement within his own ranks.
Despite the growing dissent, Alexander's insatiable ambition eventually led him to India, a land of myth and marvel for the Greeks, bordering what they thought was the edge of the known world. His army, however, was already incredibly fatigued after years and years of relentless campaigning.
Alexander genuinely believed he was on the verge of conquering the known world. Ancient Greek geography, which Aristotle would have taught him, suggested that the great ocean surrounding the eastern side of the world was only a few days' march beyond the Indus River. He was also motivated by India's legendary wealth, particularly its gold, and the desire to reclaim territory that had once, centuries before, been part of the Persian Empire.
But his men?
His men were terrified by the unknown dangers, the intense heat, the stories of monstrous snakes, the massive war elephants they had heard about, and the relentless monsoon rains that had begun just as they arrived. The Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC against King Porus was unlike any previous engagement Alexander had faced. It was a true test of his adaptability. Porus's army featured these formidable war elephants, immense creatures that initially broke the disciplined ranks of the Macedonian phalanx, causing panic and chaos.
Elephants in battle must have been terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. Alexander, ever the master of tactical innovation, responded brilliantly. He divided his forces, used a complex night maneuver to cross the river at an unexpected point, catching Porus at a disadvantage. He demonstrated incredible flexibility against the elephants, using coordinated infantry and cavalry attacks to break their charges and attack them from behind. Porus himself, described as a giant of a man and a truly courageous king, fought with immense bravery, even after being wounded multiple times. Impressed by his dignity and defeat, Porus reportedly asked to be treated as a king. Alexander not only spared him, but expanded his territories, incorporating Porus as a loyal ally who would provide elephants and troops for Alexander's forces later.
A sign of respect even to an enemy.
A testament to Alexander's ability to recognize and reward courage, yes. But despite this victory, the Macedonian army was increasingly disenchanted and utterly exhausted. After years of continuous campaigning, thousands of miles from home, they were demoralized by over 2 months of monsoon rain and deeply worried by persistent rumors of even larger, more powerful armies like the Nanda Empire further east on the Gangetic Plain. Rumors said they possessed hundreds of thousands of infantry and thousands of war elephants.
So more battles, bigger armies.
Exactly. At the Hyphasis River, after Alexander had made passionate appeals to continue, the army simply refused to go any further. They held a silent, unwavering collective mutiny.
Imagine that scene. The greatest conqueror the world had ever seen, who had never lost a single battle, finally faced his ultimate defeat. Not on some bloody field, but in a quiet, unwavering standoff with his own exhausted, rain-soaked men at the Hyphasis River. It must have been a crucible for his legendary ego, a moment where his boundless ambition crashed against the undeniable, very human limits of his army. What did that do to a man who believed he was destined to conquer the world?
Alexander was absolutely furious. He secluded himself in his tent for 3 days, attempting to break his army's will through his displeasure, hoping they would relent. He then made a final, passionate appeal, recounting their shared achievements, the glory that awaited them further east, pleading with them. And it was no use. The soldiers listened in respectful, somber silence, but remained utterly unmoved.
His charisma failed him for the first time.
It seems so. It was the ultimate test of his command, and for the first time, his will was broken by the collective will of his men. Finally, Alexander accepted his general's reluctant advice and, interpreting unfavorable omens from sacrifice as a convenient excuse, perhaps agreed to turn back. This moment, more than any battle, marked the definitive and humiliating end of his territorial expansion. It was a profound blow to his sense of destiny.
The return journey from India presented Alexander with new, formidable challenges, particularly the brutal march through the Gedrosian Desert. This wasn't a military campaign, but a test of sheer survival, and it seems like one he almost self-imposed.
Alexander chose a shorter, more direct route inland through the Gedrosian Desert, which is modern Balochistan in Iran, aiming for the city of Pura. His reasons are debated by historians. Some suggest it was a bold attempt to outdo legendary figures like Semiramis and Cyrus the Great, who had reportedly suffered immense losses attempting similar routes, maybe a point of pride for Alexander.
Trying to succeed where others failed.
Possibly. Others believe it was a necessary logistical decision, maybe to scout a route for his navy, which was sailing along the coast, and secure a supply line. Regardless of the reason, this 450-mile march was incredibly harsh. Scorching temperatures forced the army to march largely throughout the night, leading to severe supply shortages, thirst, and exhaustion.
How bad were the losses?
Terrible. Many men and pack animals died. Some ancient sources claim as much as 3/4 of the army perished, though modern estimates are generally lower, maybe 30,000 to 40,000 lost. Still a catastrophic number. Alexander himself famously shared in the suffering, refusing water when his men couldn't have it, a gesture that both solidified his bond with his troops and showcased his own immense endurance and leadership, even in adversity.
That march through the Gedrosian Desert, it just sounds horrific. You can almost feel the sun beating down, the desperation for water. It really brings home the brutal reality of ancient warfare, doesn't it? It makes you wonder, if you were a soldier there, would you still follow him? And this immense cost in human lives, all after the army had already forced him to turn back from India. It hints at deep-seated frustrations brewing within his ranks.
Indeed. And those frustrations boiled over upon their return to the Persian heartland. Back in Susa, Alexander undertook several important administrative tasks. This included the controversial mass marriage ceremony, where thousands of his Macedonian officers and soldiers married Persian noblewomen. He also pushed forward the policy of integrating Persian troops directly into elite Macedonian units.
His homonoia policy again. Fusion.
His attempt at homonoia, yes. A genuine fusion of cultures in his mind, perhaps. But it led to intense resistance from his traditional Macedonian veterans. At Opis, on the Tigris River, Macedonian veterans openly mutinied. They felt their privileged position was being diluted, their glory shared, and their king was abandoning Macedonian heritage for barbarian flatterers and customs.
Another mutiny. How did he handle this one?
He acted swiftly and ruthlessly at first. He had the ringleaders arrested and executed on the spot. But then, facing the entire army, he delivered this furious yet ultimately conciliatory speech, reminding them of their shared history, their victories, and how much they owed him. It led to this highly emotional reconciliation that temporarily healed the rift, but the underlying tension of his Persianization policy definitely remained.
A significant blow to Alexander, personally and perhaps politically, was the sudden, unexpected death of his closest friend, Hephaestion. This must have devastated him.
It was a profound, perhaps irreparable blow. Hephaestion, described universally as Alexander's closest companion and most trusted confidant, died of a fever in Ecbatana. Alexander was absolutely devastated. He displayed extreme, almost uncontrolled grief.
How extreme.
Reports say he crucified Hephaestion's physician for failing to save him. He ordered elaborate, incredibly expensive funeral ceremonies that required temples to be pulled down to create space. He even sought to have his friend declared a god, consulting the oracle of Amun about it. This profound loss removed a crucial moderating influence from Alexander's life.
Hephaestion kept him grounded.
Perhaps. Following Hephaestion's death, Alexander reportedly displayed increasing volatility and psychological instability. His drinking bouts became more frequent and extreme, sometimes lasting multiple days, and culminating in troubling episodes of paranoia and violence. Hephaestion was his emotional anchor, it seems, and without him, Alexander seemed to lose a part of himself.
Alexander eventually arrived back in Babylon, reportedly preparing for an invasion of Arabia, but mysterious omens and a sudden debilitating illness struck him down, leading to his untimely death. The end of an era.
It was. Chaldean philosophers, known for their astrological predictions, reportedly begged him not to enter Babylon, prophesying his death if he did. Despite these ominous warnings and other strange omens, like a story of a commoner somehow ending up sitting on his throne wearing his robes, Alexander proceeded, driven by his relentless ambition. He fell ill with a raging fever after a night of heavy drinking, and his condition rapidly deteriorated. He died on June 10, 323 BC, just a month short of his 33rd birthday.
So young, but how did he die? Is it clear?
Not at all clear. Ancient chroniclers offer wildly conflicting accounts, adding to the mystery that surrounds his entire life. Some suggest natural causes, like malaria, which was certainly common in the swampy regions around Babylon. This version is presented in more sober sources, like the royal diaries, the official court record. Others, notably a more sensationalist source known as the pamphlet, point directly to poisoning, orchestrated by his officers who perhaps feared the king's growing absolutism, his increasingly erratic behavior, or simply stood to benefit immensely from his death and the inevitable carving up of his empire.
Poisoning. Is there evidence?
Modern historians still vigorously debate this. Alexander's symptoms could align with known poisons, that's true. And it's also curious, maybe suspicious, that no doctor was recorded actively trying to cure him, which seems strange for such a powerful figure. But there's no definitive proof either way. It remains one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Regardless of the cause, Alexander left no clear heir. His son with Roxanne was still an infant, and his half-brother, Philip Aridaeus, was considered mentally incapable. His last words, if they were even spoken, were ambiguously reported as, "to the strongest," or perhaps he simply handed his signet ring to Perdiccas, one of his generals.
To the strongest, that's asking for trouble.
It was. This profound ambiguity immediately led to the Wars of the Diadochi, the successors, a brutal and protracted conflict that consumed a generation and irrevocably fragmented his vast empire. The very empire he had forged with such incredible speed and bloodshed dissolved almost as quickly as it was created.
So Alexander conquered most of the known world, but his empire didn't outlive him, fracturing into separate Hellenistic kingdoms almost immediately. What then is his lasting legacy, if his political creations shattered so quickly?
That's the key question, isn't it? His reign definitely marked the end of the classical era of independent Greek city-states and the dawn of the Hellenistic age, which flourished for 3 centuries. While his political empire fragmented, Alexander's conquests unleashed a transformative wave. Greek civilization, culture, language, and administrative structures spread extensively across vast territories that were previously untouched by Hellenic influence, reaching as far as India.
So the cultural impact was huge, even if the empire wasn't stable.
Immense. He laid long-term foundations. He built numerous cities, many named Alexandria, which served as cultural bastions, commercial hubs, and centers of Greek learning for centuries to come. Alexander was more than just a brilliant general. He was a revolutionary figure who dared to try and fuse cultures, though not without immense human cost and, as we saw, significant internal tensions within his own army. His dream of homonoia, that unity of minds between peoples, a concept perhaps born from Aristotle's teachings, though ultimately unrealized through conquest in his lifetime, profoundly shaped the intellectual and cultural landscape for centuries.
So,
Well, he essentially brute forced a cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Centuries later, this interconnected world he created helped enable things like the Silk Road. It influenced the Roman Empire's administrative structures. It even inspired future rulers like Napoleon Bonaparte. His actions permanently altered the course of Eurasian history, creating a truly interconnected world where Greek thought and language became a lingua franca for trade and scholarship for a very long time.
we've journeyed today from Macedonia's rugged highlands all the way to the plains of India, witnessing Alexander's meteoric rise, his undeniable strategic genius, his, complex relationships, and the immense personal cost of his boundless ambition. He really was a figure who, as one source puts it, soared too quickly and burned too intensely to endure. So what does this all mean for us looking back? Alexander's life, filled with unparalleled conquests, and these visionary, if flawed, attempts at cultural fusion, raises fundamental questions that still resonate today, don't they? Can true unity actually be forged through force, or does it require genuine consent? What is the ultimate price of ambition, not just for the conqueror, but for those caught in his wake the countless lives and cultures forever changed? And how do we reconcile the enlightened despot who studied with Aristotle with the brutal pragmatist who raised cities and executed friends? His legacy forces us to consider how individual will can redraw the map of the world, but also the enduring challenges of governing diverse peoples long after the conqueror is gone, leaving us to grapple with the complexities of his lasting and often contradictory impact. Something to definitely think about.